everyone. This is Raj. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I've been waiting for this Raspberry Pi for a very long time. All the hardware setup and the software setup, I am going to do this in the Raspberry Pi and much more. So any big step, we need to start with a small step. So let's open it up and set the Raspberry Pi. Here we have everything after opening up the package. We got a screen, we got a case with a fan, we got our most powerful computer, the Raspberry Pi. It's 4B model and 8 GB RAM. We got heatsink, we got memory card which has 128 GB. So these are the list which I have it in here and have it in the desk. So with this we are going to build the Raspberry Pi. So it's time to apply our heatsink into our Raspberry Pi. The squared one supposed to go with this bigger chip in the Raspberry Pi processor, and the rectangular one supposed to go with the DDR RAM, and the small heatsink which is supposed to go to the Ethernet processor, small processor. So why we are using the heatsink mean in order to reduce the temperature of the Raspberry Pi. I have finally attached the heatsink over the processor, over the RAM, and as well as the right corner of the Ethernet little processor. So 3 heatsink is in the place. Okay, finally I have set up the fan in the board. If you see here, we have 4 screws tied up in the front, and the back is I have set it up with the fan where the Pi needs to be cooled. I have set it up, all the setup process required for the Raspberry Pi hardware setup. Now we have two options. Either we can connect with a fan in case if you are processing heavy data or heavy processing, or you just need to have some kind of screen or so, you can able to fix it up. Both this option we will look into this. I have completely set up all the hardware setup, and now I have the charger also. So it is completed now. From the hardware perspective, let's check. Setup has been completed. Let's set up the software setup for Raspberry Pi. I'm going to your website and downloading the Raspberry Pi OS. We have an image installer for Mac which will be installed for Raspberry Pi, where we can mount the OS. I'm downloading the image installer and saving it here. It will take some time. Once this is installed, I need to install this in my Mac. After this, I can able to install the Raspberry Pi OS to the SD card. That is quick, major. Now I need to choose the OS. What OS I need to install? So there are multiple options we can use to install this. Which one is Raspberry Pi 32-bit? Right now the stable version is 32-bit, and media, this so many things is there. So other OS also we can able to install, like OS full. This will have the entire Raspberry Pi OS, and this is light. It's a light version of Raspberry Pi, which you don't have the desktop environment, and this will have the desktop environment which has 2.8 GB of downloader. So this is my first time, so let's just install the full version. I need to choose the card. This is my card, and I need to write it. It will ask me will be erased and if you want to continue, yes. It will take quite some time because it has to download and install it in the SD card. Once that is done, we'll proceed with installing this SD card into our Raspberry Pi board. Right now the Raspberry Pi 32-bit OS has been installed in the STD card. Now I can remove the card. I can put it in my Raspberry Pi hardware. I can eject before ejecting this Raspberry Pi SD card. I need to create couple of things. First thing is I need to create SH file because right now we are trying to do a headless installation. So which means we don't need a keyboard or a mouse for our Raspberry Pi. We can directly SH into our Raspberry Pi and we can control it over there. So for that, the initial thing we need to do is we need to create a SH file in the Raspberry Pi. So for that, let me eject this file and let me again plug my SD card. I have plugged my SD card. Here is our boot. So we have our boots files. So let me go to command prompt. We need to create a SSH file. Why? Because our installation is based on headless. So in order to access our Raspberry Pi, once I have inserted this SD card into my Raspberry Pi hardware, I need to SSH into my hardware and access the Raspberry Pi OS. In order to do that, I needed to create a SSH file. So let me create an SSH file. Touch volumes. This is the file I have created. So let me click on it and double check that file has been created. Yep. Now the file has been created. I will close this terminal and eject my boot device and plug into my hardware. I have switched on my Raspberry Pi. So let's just SSH into our Raspberry Pi and check it out whether our system has been rebooted or not. So initially I will do a default username is a Pi, and once it is run up and running, you will have Raspberry Pi as a host name dot local. Let me check it out whether it's connecting or not. Okay, now we have connected with our SD card with our Raspberry Pi board. Let's do a search into our Raspberry Pi. So it's now trying to connect with our Raspberry Pi. It is asking, do we need to have a fingerprint array? Just type yes, and the default Raspberry Pi password is Raspberry. We are logged into our Raspberry successfully, and this is it. This video we have done connected with our board, and we have also installed the software which inserted into a SD card, and the SD card again we have inserted into our Raspberry Pi board. After that we have installed this SH file in the SD card. Then we have now do a SSH into a Raspberry Pi, and we have logged in into a Raspberry Pi directly. We have successfully made the connection to our Raspberry Pi. As if you look at this, I have my running Raspberry Pi connected to the board, and I have even logged into the Raspberry Pi. Command prompt. I think we have done with our tutorial as of now. Uh, I will show you the UI using VNC later, but this part of the tutorial is based on connecting with our Raspberry Pi, set up the hardware setup. Pretty much we have covered up everything. We still need to go a long way. I'm going to install a home server. I'm going to install Kubernetes clusters and much more. Please wait it for the future video. Thank you so much for listening. In future, I will make much more videos like Raspberry Pi clusters, Kubernetes, deploying our own home server instead of deploying AWS, which cost a much more. We are going to create our own AWS servers in local. Stay tuned. Thank you.